Thank you all for being here bright and early on Monday morning. It's not so cold. It doesn't feel too February-like. We are very pleased to have with us today Dr. Rebecca Cunningham visiting the Morris campus, and I will introduce her to you in just a minute, but I want to start by acknowledging that people, place, and purpose at the University of Minnesota Morris are super important, and more important than I think they are on many other university campuses. And with that in mind, I will remind us where we are. The University of Minnesota Morris is located along Owabapte Wakpa, a place from which Dakota turnips have been dug river, on the edge of Mashkoda-Aking prairie land. This land has been cared for and called home by the Dakota people and later the Ojibwa people and other native peoples from time immemorial. Our state's name, Minnesota, comes from the Dakota name for this region, Minnesota Makoche, the land where the waters reflect the skies. Acknowledging the land and our history in this place is an offering of solidarity with and respect for Native nations and peoples. In doing so, we, the University of Minnesota Morris, reaffirm our commitment to our responsibilities rooted in the history of our campus site as a Native American boarding school, as well as our distinctive mission as a public liberal arts college within the University of Minnesota, and our federal recognition as a Native American serving non-tribal institution. We'll start this morning, as we have, as has become our custom at this point, by allowing Dr. Cunningham to give a few remarks on one of the 5 topics that all 5 of the finalists are being asked to address. These are all recorded, and you can find them on the university's presidential search website, so you can watch different topics as they're addressed around the state. We'll then spend the rest of our time addressing questions from all of you. Cards, questions. So we will do that. If you, and then if people are online, you can also submit questions using the Q&A function online, and those will get to me as well. So did you get a card when you were coming in? Yes. Okay. If you have a card and or you need a card, Dave has cards and you can just hold it up and he will pick it up. But if you need a card and have a question to ask on that, just raise your hand and he will make sure that you get one. And after today's forum, we invite you, of course, to provide feedback. The QR code and a shortened Z link on the screen will take you there. And it's also, again, available on the presidential search website. Your input, and I would add the University of Minnesota Morris input, is extremely important to the regents as they deliberate and ultimately select the next president of our institution. Each finalist will interview with the Board of Regents on Monday, February 26th. The times will be announced later. But you can keep that in mind. This is a fast process, but I want to make sure that our voices are heard. Now it is my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Rebecca Cunningham, Vice President for Research and Innovation at the University of Michigan. Vice President Cunningham earned her MD from Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia, and you can find out more about her background, including her full CV and bio, on the Presidential Search website. Today, she will address the topic of becoming a university for all. So welcome.
There. Good morning. Thank you. Yeah, good morning. What an honor and a privilege to be here this morning. I really want to take a moment to thank you, the students and the faculty and the community that have taken out your time today on this early Monday morning to come and have your thoughts heard and advance the mission of the university. And boy, the power of the passion here is, I can already feel so palpably even in our morning session. I want to thank the trustees for the opportunity to come to the campuses, to the staff that are driving me around the state to make the whirlwind of logistics possible, as well as the staff here who have provided such a warm welcome and logistics this morning. What a wonderful opportunity to get to kick off across the campus. So I'm certainly going to address the themes and the prompts that are given, not just theoretically, or by sharing my views, but also partly by sharing with you some of my lived experience that I bring to this position that you might not read in my CV, and what some of my actions have been to live these values. I was saying earlier, I can't know about Morris by looking at your website. I have to come here, and you can't really know about me reading my CV. I have to come here and shake your hand and get a chance to know you. So first I'll say it's wonderful to be back in Minnesota. I'm not a stranger to Minnesota. My Cunningham family has deep ties to the University of Minnesota. My late father-in-law was on faculty in the Twin Cities for 40 years. A gifted educator and passionate about the environment, advancing new writing, textbooks on environmental science were at the forefront of the field, with his writing often about the stewardship of local Minnesota land. He passed this passion of a sustainable future and a love of Minnesota onto his family, and then to me, and then to our children, his grandchildren. I've centered, and for decades, we have shared and centered our three daughters' family time with Minnesota values in Minnesota, paddling the boundary waters, most summers, cross-country skiing the lakes in the winter. And indeed, I was married a few hundred miles away here in Ely. I have a lot more to learn about Minnesota and a lot more to learn about the University of Minnesota. But I want you to know that maybe isn't on my CV that I care deeply about this state. I have family ties here for 3 decades, and I will care and be back and forth in this state for decades to come, regardless of this opportunity. My current role, I have 5 years of executive experience at a Big Ten Midwest public university that has 3 system campuses. My portfolio crosses the 3 system campuses and a robust health system. I've been deeply engaged in each one in a system approach with their different missions and their goals to fit the needs of their students, their faculty, and the staff as we look to serve the state as a public, to serve the state of Michigan. All along, you heard I have a degree in medicine. I've been an educator. I also have been a faculty in a school on campus in the School of Public Health and have decades of experience in educating undergraduates, master's students, and graduate students. So on to this theme today on inclusion and community partnerships. You know, I'll start first by saying that higher education, and specifically public higher education, plays obviously such a critical role in understanding and acknowledging and mitigating the structural inequalities that drive social, economic, educational, and health disparities. I've spent the past 3 decades of my career working diligently to advance this important mission, doing it with community at the forefront and in partnership with community. And when I talk here about inclusive definition and when I talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I really want to be clear that I mean that in the broadest sense of inclusion possible, ranging from race and socioeconomic status to sexual orientation, to religion, to veteran status, to disability status. There are a lot of ways that we need to center the voices to be inclusive to really meet our full missions. I've worked for some years to move these ideas to action. One of the ways that I do that at the executive table is I oversee the DEI planning and plan for our research enterprise crossing our system. And I launched the first research DEI system-wide plan. This sets both the strategy for the people, the process, and of our DEI journey in research specifically. If I back up a moment on more of a personal note and how I drive passion for this and passion for public education and passion for inclusion and access, I was the first member of my family to attend a residential college. And indeed, that was a small liberal arts college, 200 miles away from my home at the time, which felt exactly like going to Mars. I was lucky to be funded by Pell Grants, which allowed my family and the economic hardship that we were in at the time to provide an education. My first experiences in college in that small liberal arts school, where I went knowing that I wanted practical skills and knowing that I wanted a STEM degree and I was hoping to be a doctor and lift my family from economic hardship. But what I found at that liberal arts school was critical thinking, writing, philosophy, which gave my future public health self the ability to communicate further. Did I mention writing? Really, you know, that foundation that I got that I didn't know that I needed, that we have to articulate to our students of why it's important, was a really critical underpinning to give me the life tools that I need. And it's those experiences that inform my guiding principle that talent is everywhere. And an essential role of public higher education is to provide access and opportunity for all students, regardless of their background, their economic privilege, their affinity group, to enable them to fulfill their full potential. I also understand firsthand the academic and social challenges that many first-generation students face as they navigate a transition to college. This also laid the foundation for why I've chose to spend my career mostly working, completely working on public education and working with communities and underserved communities to enhance those partnerships. But if we step back a little bit with our prompt here, to build a diverse, equitable, and inclusive community, we as academic leaders, we need to know why we're doing that. And we're doing it because our mission in higher education is research, is service, and it ties directly to that mission. We know that we will only excel and be competitive and be the best educators and best researchers and best providers of service for our state and for our public mission when we broadly are very focused on incorporating in the values of diversity of voice, inclusion of people and voice, creating belonging and community. Can we achieve those goals in higher education? There's a vast body of research to support that diversity of equity inclusion improves our primary missions. And that's why we do it. It gets confusing out there currently about DEI across the country, but that's why we're doing it. We are better across all of our missions when we do so. So some specific examples on the education component, to truly achieve our goals in our mission and in our educational mission, our undergraduate and graduate students, all of our students, they need to be able to see themselves in those they're learning from. For a diverse student body to thrive, we need a diversity of our faculty also in all the ways of inclusion that I mentioned to you before. I worked on this at the University of Michigan because the power of seeing your identity reflected in the authority and style of the educators and researchers you respect is so powerful. In this regard, I spearheaded a university-wide effort that culminated in a large investment, both with the university as well as with our federal agencies to support and recruit new faculty members with the diversity focus. And more importantly, we then spearheaded the program to create a cohort focus for them so that they could be ensured to succeed. And we did this because it will make our teaching and research stronger. Moving further, thinking about undergraduate, and I had some great conversations on micro internships here, and I know you're doing a lot of really innovative things on the Morris campus. But one of the things that I saw as a gap in how we help our students and students from a wide variety of backgrounds succeed is we know engaged learning is so important for students. We know that our students that are truly engaged in hands-on opportunities, working closely with faculty, they do better, they have more opportunity, they succeed better, their retention is better, their graduation is better. There's so many benefits there. And in addition, when we can get students involved in engaged learning through the university, especially when we can fund it and we can have it be paid, then they, instead of working at a coffee shop, they can work with skilled faculty and folks in the community who can give them job skills and mentorship and can help them then also make those connections that are so important for that first job. At the University of Michigan, we have amazing undergraduate research internship opportunities, specifically in the first and second year. I recognized a gap in our junior year rising students, and that in that group of students, there was less funding and less clarified programming. And we know, especially students that don't have, from elite backgrounds, that don't have family ties to network them into that first job, that internship opportunity in junior year is often really where they can get that networking, get that letter of reference that can really help them move on. And so with that, I created programming for an undergraduate engaged learning opportunity between the junior and senior year. And then I worked with our fine alumni colleagues to tell these sorts of stories, and we fundraised for it. And we're very proud of where it sits right now. On the research side, in terms of advancing a DEI mission, following the tragic summer of 2020 and national unrest, I launched the funding for research and scholarship on anti-racism to support research that address specifically the societal racial inequalities with the goal to inform actions to achieve equity and justice. In 2020, I reached deep into my administrative pockets, and I provided $2 million for anti-racism across the system, scholarship and supporting nearly 50 projects across our 3 campuses. And then we gathered people together for symposiums so that they could meet each other, not be a community of one in whatever local department they were in, so that they could also network and further elevate their work. The second part of this question, and I had some great conversation with folks this morning, was about partnering with communities. And, specifically, I want to talk about tribal communities for a moment. I know Morris here has a deep commitment to tribal communities and to students. And I really look forward to learning more about engaging with the tribal leaders here and regarding the Truth Project in Minnesota. I have deep experience working with our tribal and First Nations and respect for the Indigenous sovereignty at the University of Michigan and across Michigan. I currently oversee our Native American graves protection and repatriation work at the University of Michigan, a program that's recognized nationally by our tribal communities as an exemplar of this restorative work, important work that returns the ancestors and funerary objects to their rightful communities. We have a lot of work to do. It's been nationally a big topic, and I'm very proud of the work that we've done there. I was some of the first to hire. I expanded the staff, hiring tribal community folks to really be moving us forward. To further build trust and celebrate our partnership with our tribal leaders, my office is currently planning to host a dinner of gratitude with the tribal elders from across the Midwest that we work with in April to encourage dialogue, continue to build trust, and strengthen their relationships. Finally, I'll end with a story on community engagement and an institutional commitment. And I'm going to tell you a story about the Flint water crisis. So one of our campuses is in Flint, Michigan. And I had worked in Flint with community partners for decades on the ground when the Flint water crisis hit. I had long trusted relationships working with the community. When the water crisis hit, the urban, mostly Black community of Flint was deeply distrustful, with good reason, of the state public health department and the government agencies. There were 3 universities, and all of a sudden, many faculty and researchers across all 3 of our universities started parachuting in, well-meaning, deeply problematic. It was chaos. I worked with the community partners who I had known for years through good relationships, through building trust, with the provosts of the 3 local universities to bring in the community leaders, and negotiated the formation of a community-led partnership with the 3 universities in chorus and unison in the background, following the lead of the communities to do community engaged work, bring the resources of the academics and the educational mission to bear, while letting the community be where they should be, which was out front. We have had downstream effects on this that have been just tremendous. And follow-on years when COVID hit, it was that organization that had the trusted relationships with the community to provide COVID vaccine information through the community as a trusted partner. So I'll stop there. I want to thank you again for hosting me this morning, and I'm really excited to get to talk to our chancellor with more questions. Sorry.
You just talked about are things that are very near to what we do here and of interest to the things that we do on this campus. And I want to follow up on one of those right away. Given the recent SCOTUS decision, how do you see the work of, you mentioned scholarships for historically underrepresented populations. How do you see us going forward to meet the kinds of DEI goals that you were just discussing?
Yes, the SCOTUS decision has obviously had and will continue to have tremendous impacts across the country. We felt those slightly less in Michigan, and I bring the experience of we were already operating under the principles that the rest of the country has now been imposed under the SCOTUS decision at the University of Michigan because of a law of a Prop 2, which had passed 15 or 20 years ago at Michigan, where we already had to consider enrollment and recruiting in a broad, holistic way, and certainly not with any focus on individual criteria. And so, with that, I bring the knowledge and an understanding that we've been able to do that very successfully at the University of Michigan. The path forward here is a clear focus on a very holistic review that allows students to fully demonstrate who they are through the assortment of their activities and their work prior to coming and prior to putting their application in. And then also to really focus recruiting efforts at the local level with good relationships in communities where we feel that our students are best able to be served by a broad mission. And so there's certainly a path forward. And I know the SCOTUS decision will be a change for many. And I know folks in your office here have, and across the country have reached out to our teams at Michigan to get their knowledge, and they're thinking about how we've been able to do this, but we're not strangers to this, and there is definitely a path forward.
No, there, we just have to adjust. One more addendum to this before we move on to other topics, and that is regarding access in terms of disability and centering access more broadly. How do you see that fitting into the kinds of work that you've just outlined?
So we have to focus on inclusion broadly, as I mentioned before, and broadly certainly means inclusion of focus on disability and access. And that also means, obviously, we have to be attentive to all the ways that our students with disabilities have access needs, as well as the planning that they need for their education moving forward to be able to fully realize their potential. And so I see it all wrapped into the broad ways that we must support our students. Yeah.
Thank you. You may have heard, if you've been doing some research on the University of Minnesota, that we face some enrollment challenges on this campus, but not just on this campus. And with that in mind, higher education overall is facing some uncertain futures with expected enrollment declines, continued reductions in state support, and significant pressure to reduce or freeze tuition costs. What kinds of strategies might you have to ensure the university delivers on its mission, advances a solid research and teaching agenda, and provides fair and appropriate compensation to faculty and staff? I know it's a huge question.
A lot of questions. I think I'm going to start at a very high level. So, enrollment management strategies are key. I guess the first thing I'll say about that is you have excellent enrollment management professionals here, and there are excellent enrollment professional managers nationally to help think about many of the details, which I'll get into in a moment. But as a president, one of the key roles is to really help think about vision and strategy. And so one of the things to sort of step back and thinking about enrollment management is, first of all, our addressing our enrollment issues are not likely the final fix to all of our issues and financial issues. Certainly is a key component, but we need to think about what that vision is and what role enrollment management plays in addressing the financial issues of the day, which are certainly true with demographic declines across universities, small and large across the country. But so one of the things to step back and say from a presidential or a system level, and I'm sure you, Chancellor, have been thinking a fair amount about this, yes, is, what is the optimal size for Morris? What is the optimal size? And the optimal size is maybe not peak size. Somebody wise recently has said to me, the best size for my jeans right now is not the size that I necessarily was when I was in high school. We have to think about what's best for us now in this place that we are in 2024. What is the optimal size for our mission that meets the mission of our students, that meets the missions of the system, that meets the mission of the state? Once we decide what that optimal size is, then we can work collectively towards that and addressing the services that are needed for it. And then, following that, there is the need for aggressive enrollment strategies towards that mission, really thinking about as you have clarified what differentiates you and your market, knowing exactly what your market is. I would want to know both here at this campus as well as the other campuses, what is the local market? You each have very distinguished missions. How are you differentiating yourself exactly from main competitors? How are we not competing internally for students so that we can best get the right students in the right place and for the right education that they need at the time? So I think those are some high level thoughts. I know to go in a little bit deeper, there's certainly opportunities for, more in the weeds enrollment strategies in terms of Are you competing only for, the 18-year-old market? Is there a role for a return to learn market for educating folks who need upskilling or reskilling? The folks, like my mother who went back to school while working 2 jobs at night to complete her education. Where does that fit within the system? Does it or does it not fit here? What are the programs that you have for streamlined enrollment between your community colleges and Morris? What is the path for Minnesotans who maybe didn't come here initially, but will, is there a path for them? I know that there are some relationships with the community colleges. I want to understand what's working and what's not working about those particular components. And then, another component of that obviously is always affordability. And how we're getting the message out to students on what affordability and access looks like. At the University of Michigan, we have something called the Go Blue Guarantee, where every student in a particular income bracket or under knows, and we hit home hard with marketing all over the state that that they don't have to worry about the sticker price, which is terrifying for most families. And how to be thinking about that. And I know the state of Minnesota has recently put something forward here, and that's really exciting. What else will the University of Minnesota do with that? To be differentiated for what it can offer for assistance and access for students. And so I think those are some of the ways that we think about that collectively.
Thank you. And you set up perfectly the next question. As president of the University of Minnesota, you are president over 5 campuses, and we keep, that's one of our mantras out here. University of Minnesota is 5 campuses, a 5-campus system. At the same time, you are essentially chancellor of the Twin Cities campus. How, if you can imagine balancing those roles, can you talk a little bit about how you might see balancing those 2 roles, which are sometimes in competition?
Yes, certainly. I mean, first of all, the beauty of, I think, the opportunity for this position for the state of Minnesota at large is that it has this system that really can offer so much uniqueness to students across its 5 campuses. And to me, that's a reason I'm certainly interested in this position and what the power of that is for Minnesotans and for the university at whole, and how we could elevate that strategy is really critically important. But from a chancellor perspective, I mean, there's always pros and cons. So obviously you're the chancellor essentially of the main campus with many responsibilities there. So the advantage is, as we're working then together as chancellors, I also am not so removed from the day-to-day working of the issues at hand, with the provost and with deans to be out of the loop for what's actually happening a little bit more on the ground. So that's a positive side of it. If you're truly doing this job right, you're always focused on the system. And in addition to the individual schools. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's just innate to the job and what has to be done.
I want to go back to, in some ways, what is one of our favorite topics around here, which is engaged learning. We think we do it really well, although we can keep doing it better, and we are working on that. And there's a question from the audience about how engaged learning might include community engagement. Mm-hmm. And, how do we incentivize faculty, students, and communities to work together? And as a part of that, does extension play a role? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what an amazing opportunity here with extension. So community is key. There's engaged learning. Engaged learning can take on many different forms, can take on the forms of working, in labs, can take on the forms of working, with professors on all kinds of projects in the hands-on way at the university. But, some of the most exciting opportunities are the engaged learning opportunities that happen in the community. I ran the undergraduate internship program for community engaged learning when I ran the Injury Prevention Center at the university. And we went out specifically, and I was talking to somebody here this morning around community engagement. And, we went out specifically and solicited from the community and from organizations and also from public health departments. And you have extension offices, which is even more completely amazing, solicited what their needs were, and then brought those back and matched students with those often in a funded way. And that gives the opportunities for the students, all the things that I mentioned before in terms of the hands-on life skills that they can get, the networking, the opportunities, just the visibility of what people do outside of college when they go to work every day, and what that means for how they think about their career path in those one-on-one conversations. So I think that's absolutely critical. Extension is an amazing opportunity. At the University of Michigan, we did not have extension offices, but when I needed to reach deep into the community at the county level, I partnered with the MSU extension offices, specifically to get us engaged in the opioid prevention work that we were doing across every community and reach in. And with that provided opportunities then broadly for our students, undergraduate, master, and graduate to be connected to that work in the counties. The ability for you to have 87 counties, with a connection and a liaison is a tremendous opportunity for the way we all are better at a public university, which is when, we have the local voice to really keep us with our feet on the ground. And so we don't wander off into ivory towers.
I will say, I would be negligent if I didn't point out that we think one of the real advantages of being where we are is the ability we have to be woven into the community. And I think that we've done that in all sorts of really interesting ways. And we're fortunate to have the West Central Research and Outreach Center with Extension right across the river. And we partner on a lot of projects with them. And I think it is a real opportunity that we have that is distinctive to our particular location and institution.
I loved what I heard also about micro opportunities
Yeah.
there. Obviously all of our students don't have the opportunity to take 12 weeks or to take, a semester to be engaged. So how can we drop in those micro opportunities for 2 or 3 weeks, which can have tremendous impact. So I really love it.
So this is a big question. This is the most perhaps amorphous of them. What do you see as the purpose of a land grant institution? And how do you see yourself strengthening the university's land grant mission?
Sure. So the land grant mission is just tremendous. I think that, historically with the Morrell Act and with really its initial, history of focusing on a high quality education for the working people, really transformed the landscape of higher education in making it clear that higher education was certainly not just for the elite, but was for everybody and could raise up our citizenry broadly by being really fully engaged. A modern land grant university has, I think, a couple of missions that are in addition to that. First of all, obviously a commitment to access and affordability and to educate the full, all citizens to have the opportunity to participate and reach their full potential. Also has a mission around stewarding land that's different than in prior generations of the original mission of a land grant. Has really commitment and need for service in a different way. And that service, which we touched on with extension, for a land grant to really be reaching into the community and reaching in both for education, but reaching in also in ways that we can provide that translation of our research, and research is too wonky a word often. I think it's really about the knowledge that gets generated at universities, how that can be bi-directionally informed, and then can translate into work actually in the community. And then finally, the straight service mission of a land grant. And these are the things that are deeply appealing to me, and I think are drawing people to a land grant institution in general, but beyond a public university. And at Michigan, we certainly are a university for the state of Michigan and have deep commitments across the state of Michigan. But the opportunity to really be grounded really fully in the service to the state as a land grant is incredibly meaningful.
Thank you. And then following up on that, I want to go back to something that you said in your opening remarks, and you may already have said it. I imagine you have more to say about it, but you touched on tribal relations. Mm-hmm. And in connection to land grant, I think that's a particularly challenging situation to navigate. And I want to repeat something that former President Joan Gable said. As a land grant university that was built within tribal lands, we remain deeply committed to rebuilding trust with Minnesota's tribal nations. We aim to form mutually beneficial partnerships, research policies and practices that respect tribal traditions, languages, and governance. So following on what you were just saying, what do you see as rebuilding trust, mutual trust
Right.
within that framework with these sovereign nations and Native communities looks like?
There's a lot of work to do, and obviously a lot of history that we have as a nation that is not one to be proud of. It's impressive the way Morris has moved forward from some of that history towards towards building trust with the tribal communities. And I mentioned before, we've spent a lot of time in my office thinking about the issue that we have of at our university in terms of the repatriation and the appropriate respectful repatriation. And through that work, I've had opportunity to work with a lot of our tribal leaders and think about the respectful way that we identify and communicate and have difficult conversations with them about repatriation specifically. But obviously, there's a lot more to do than that. I know the Truth Project has many recommendations, and I have not delved into all of them yet fully. But the opportunity certainly here around education and the commitment of education to tribal students, the commitment to the land and to restorative practices on the land with our tribal communities is really critical. The trust, and I mentioned this in the Flint community, trust is not a permanent thing. Trust can be lost, trust can be broken, trust needs to be rebuilt, trust needs to be constantly worked on. And as you build that along the way with community and certainly with the tribal communities that we're working with, we're all human and we fail here and there and do something not quite right. And then we have to have the trust and the deeper net relationship to be able to come back and recover from that and move forward and know that we'll be willing to do that we're in it for the long run.
Switching a little bit, although there certainly overlaps with all of these questions. University presidents are frequently in tough positions these days when it comes to free speech and public discourse. And I have a couple of questions on that front. In the national conversation about protected speech, particularly in higher education, especially at public institutions, there are many conflicting things to navigate. And we would like to hear a little bit more about your sense of the role of administrators in academic and student life. Are there opportunities to reflect on our strengths, weaknesses, the challenges we face in relation to free speech?
So many opportunities. An endless bounty of opportunities.
Administrative speak.
Yeah.
Opportunities.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a difficult time. So free speech and academic freedom are core to who we are. They're core to our mission at a public university. The toughest times to protect free speech are when somebody is saying something firmly that you absolutely don't agree with. And having the ability to create civil discourse around that dialogue. So we must protect free speech. That being said, it has to be coupled with good policies that make sure that when that free speech and protected speech veers off into harassment, threats, certainly violence, that we have really clarity as a community what that means. I think it's also important to know that because speech, some speech is protected in free speech, it doesn't mean it's not hurtful or harmful. And how do we navigate that? And our role as educators to make sure that we're helping our students as as current and future citizens understand what their responsibility is with free speech, what the impact of their speech, whether it is free and protected speech or not, has on the communities around them. Is a critical part of what we do. I think, as educators, it's important, especially in this time. And I have a long history for those folks who look at my scholarship of having very divided groups come together and have very difficult conversations in a civil way towards common goals. Is just that, is helping educate our students and our faculty and our staff and our communities at large, how we can, what our common goal is when we're talking about a topic. And even if we can only get to the most base common goal and we agree on absolutely nothing, perhaps we can agree on that, we would like our community to be safe and that we care about each other. And sometimes that's a good place to start from that compassion part. Sometimes when we work with groups on whatever the issue of the day is, we can't agree on absolutely anything else, but I hope we can move back to the human level where we can decide that we still care about each other as human beings, and human beings that potentially walk on the same sidewalk and eat in the same places downtown. And we have to start sometimes from that very base point to move forward. I think the other thing we need to navigate, and I'm sure you're going to go here if you haven't already gone here, is with free speech, is we also have an obligation to help our students understand that we completely respect protest, and that there's also a way how to protest, how to be effective at protesting, and what the rules of engagement there are for them. And then also how to have our student, and I talked to some folks at the One Stop, and I'm not sure if those are the student services that are helping students in general or not, but our student affairs office spends a lot of time with students before protests, helping them and the opportunities that they have for free speech, and helping them understand what the rules of engagement are so that they can be effective. Also helping the students who may be on the other side of whatever that protest is, helping them through the issues that they feel with that free speech coming forward, and how they can navigate together as a community.
Lots of opportunities,
So many
lots of opportunities. But interesting. It is an
Important.
interesting time and very important,
Really
I think. And I think it's one of the things that at a small college is particularly at the forefront, because we know our students, and,
Right.
and we do have the chance as well as the obligation to help them learn how to navigate that. Related to that, with a different audience, though, we have a question about how you might handle what experience you might have working with a polarized state legislature.
I have a fair amount of experience in working with a polarized state legislator, so I've done that for the past. We now, our legislator now, our state policy folks in Michigan are now not divided. We have a single party. However, for the past bunch of years, that certainly wasn't true. And all the time, regardless of that, we have a wide variety of political views to navigate at any given moment. And so again, and I have a lot of experience working with the legislator and working both in state and federal government. I oversee our federal relations office. I just recently hired a joint with our vice president for government relations. We just hired a new, something new in our DC office, and I work at the state level all the time. And I have done so before my administrative life in my work in public health and my work as in medicine, but before that as well. And so, the key to working with any group that's divided goes back to sort of what I talked about before, which is, what are the goals? What are their goals in state legislator, and how is our mission serving their goals, and how can we be really clarified about that? And again, I find no matter how divided people are politically, and I have worked across the aisle in any number of different ways, people can have some common goals and or a perspective, and they all care in the State House about the folks in their counties, and the folks in their counties and in their districts are folks that we are serving through our administration of health, through our educating of their citizens, through the economic development opportunities that we're giving back to them, which are really key. So, lots of experience there. On the policy front, also, I've worked with our governor. I worked with our prior governor as well. So two different parties. I served on a Republican governor's opioid commission, focusing again on our common goals for opioid misuse across the state. I also testified congressionally for the value of higher education and research universities in a very divided audience with quite pointy questions. And, that's what we do. I'm happy to represent our mission, which I believe in deeply all day long across political parties. Yeah.
So, and that is a beautiful lead in to another question from the audience. Can you talk about your experience as a cheerleader, as a champion, a morale booster, a team motivator? How do you build support for the overall goal?
Yeah, I think this is the funnest part of this job. And And in general, the jobs, no matter what senior administrator level you are a cheerleader and a champion for, for the mission. I mean, it's super easy when you really believe in the mission from the values that I talked to you about before. It makes it incredibly easy. But also there's the system here has amazing work going on. And it would be an absolute joy to cheerlead for the mission, of here, a public liberal arts mission that is so strong, as well as the missions at the other campuses. So, I mean, I think that's the job. It's the job to be out there cheerleading for it at the state level, at the policy level, at the federal level, with our alumni, who are often our biggest champions, but we can work together with them really collectively. And to be outspoken. I think it's easier also, as a president, one of the things you can do is help to create that united sense of how each of the campuses and each of the schools within the campus, you're decentralized within your campuses, I'm sure, have their own unique focus, but together we have a sum that is bigger than the parts, and how we articulate that together and advance it is an amazing opportunity, and also is not that hard to cheerlead for because it's an amazing mission.
The follow-up to that really is, if there's more that you have thought about already in terms of creating energy and teams, in effect, statewide, to advance the university. Are there things that you either bring from your experience in Michigan or that you've already imagined based on what you've learned so far about the University of Minnesota that you can think of that might be ways to really, when you're forwarding a particular agenda, how do you ensure that there is that around the state participation or vision?
I think whenever you're moving, whenever I have moved a vision or a strategy forward, in addition to having it be informed at the outset from the stakeholders around the state, across our different stakeholder groups, from our community groups to our alumni groups to our faculty and our staff and our students, after that vision and strategy gets clarified, I mean, the next part, making sure that there's really buy-in on the ground for it, and then how we can be out on the ground and get folks excited so that they can carry the water for us forward in the communities forward. So that does take team. I have a long history of both recruiting and retaining absolutely fabulous team that are far better than work than I could ever do individually. And that has to be extended into getting the right people in the right places in position across the system. And I can see, what amazing talent there is here, but that's certainly a part of the job of a president, is ensuring that the system is working with the right people connected. And I had some conversations in the forum ahead of time of, even simple things like making sure the folks across the system, once when you have an elevated vision and a strategy that you're working for, does everybody across the system that is not at Morris know what the value that Morris has to play on it, so that we can be working in a coordinated fashion broadly. And that is difficult. That takes sometimes us coming out of our silos and our own individual egos for something that is larger. But when we work in that larger way, we can also support the individual parts more freely.
Thank you. Part of that is creating your own team as well, the team that you work with. And it sounds like you've already done this to a large extent at Michigan, but can you tell us more about how you create and preserve a culture of respectful and genuinely open discourse frequently, and particularly in the office of the president, if there's a particularly prickly topic that might come up? But how do you keep people motivated within a smaller team as well and actually have open discussion?
Yeah, I've spent a fair amount of time with this and creating the culture. Everything flows from the top administrator or whatever the area are that you're in. And so, creating a culture of discourse and dialogue in my own team has been critical. One way I have approached this is certainly that the team is smarter and is better when everybody brings their wisdom to bear, and when we can really be open and honest about what we're thinking. And so, I am not the smartest person in the room or the smartest person on the team, and other people across the team are going to bring perspectives that I haven't thought of. And I hope they disagree with me, and I've encouraged them to disagree with me. so that we can, then move forward in a way that we wouldn't have done before. And if you can't create that culture where people can openly disagree with you, then you wind up going down paths that everybody knows was wrong, but somebody was afraid to tell you, which is the absolute wrong way to go. So you have to create a culture in which, there's enough humility and humbleness that my team can tell me directly, that I know you said X, Y, and Z, but by the way, we think you're 100% wrong and we really need to reconsider, and then rechart a course. And I've done that over and over again.
Thank you. That's important. I've learned that too.
Yeah.
I don't always do it well, but I've learned that it's important. I have just a couple more questions. So if there are other last questions from the audience, now is your moment before we move on. One more call for questions from you all if you have them. The one that I want to ask next has to do with donors and your work with donors, which I think is quite extensive. But can you talk a little bit about navigating that particular audience? I mean, we've talked about all students, faculty, staff, but we haven't talked about that particular experience that you have.
Yeah, alumni and our donors have the longest view often of a university, have a view that is beyond administration, have a view from community, from outside the university. Their perspective is completely critical. So I've worked in a number of different ways with donors. I mean, one, I meet not infrequently with several of the major donors that we have at the university, who are not there to fund anything at the time, but simply to provide me their input and their perspective on the issues of the day of the university, from the perspective that they bring from the business community or from the local public health community to bear. I have certainly a fair amount of extensive experience in fundraising, large gifts for major institutes, for initiatives across the globe, and have done that work, but also have fundraised for the small, but critically important, small in a major gift realm, but small in terms of the scholarships and internships components that are so really important. That the working with the alumni community, I guess another way I'll back up is we're in the middle of launching a new campaign at the university now under our new administration. And I've sat on that executive committee for the past year and a half. We've been in the quiet phase of that campaign, and then we'll be ready to launch soon. And so have been in lockstep all along the way, in the marketing and the branding and how we're going to think about that clarified vision and how we're going to reach out, but then also how the central larger campaign focus is going to fit into the individual campaign focuses of at the local level across the schools and across the chancellors at each level. I've done some thinking with our VP of development, who's been a great partner with me, also in thinking about how we fundraise a little bit differently. So, we work on a very, very decentralized model also, which often means that fundraising is very, very, very siloed. And sometimes, I know you'll find this shocking, but people feel like they might be competing. I know, I thought you might find that shocking. So, we've worked some in, allowing, certainly that having the individual fundraising goes on at the schools, but at the dean's direction, et cetera. Research and some of the biggest ideas to generate knowledge of our time don't fit into those silos necessarily. If we're going to solve, the world's crises around sustainability and the environment, we can't really just focus in one school. We have to fundraise across schools for the topic at large. And so I've done some innovative work with our VP of development in thinking about how we alter some of the structure of some of those positions, how we alter the credit in the fundraising in our local fundraising staff, so they can get credit when they fundraise for something that is in a larger goal or something that is some of the parts in addition to getting the credit that they need. People do what they're incentivized to do, so that they can also get credit locally. But some of the other ways that I've thought about development and working with that is when I first started working with development. We did a lot. We had a lot of discussions of how we could have a broad inclusion of donors in the room. And how I like to talk to lots of different people, and half the planet is it doesn't identify with a particular gender, and perhaps we could broaden that so I could talk to many people in a room as well. So those are some ways that I've worked with development in the past, and then also in some of our individual fundraising for the institutes that I've been involved in, we really focused on the shift over the past several years, which has happened across the country, but how we focus on the digital market and how we focus on reaching, the next generation of donors, how we get our younger alumni involved and how we reach them, through a digital focus about the things they care about. And then also when they care about something that may be something that happened that is related to the school that they graduated from, but it also may be related to something that's somewhere else, and how we can also get them to the right place at the right time for the broader system.
Thank you. I think one of the great joys for us in this campus has been the fact that we get to know our students so well that when they become alumni, it's always really interesting to stay connected to them and see where they're going and see what the influences, what do they continue to care about?
Right.
One of the things they continue to care about that they often learn here has to do with sustainability. So we're very proud of the record that we have and the national profile that we have on sustainability, although we also continue to recognize we have lots more work to do on that front. And that is the question that I've saved for the end. How would you support or catalyze climate action for the university system, as well as dispersed, in order to meet the overall emissions reduction goal of net zero by 2050, or for this campus earlier?
Yeah. And, and congratulations here at Morris. You clearly have been on the forefront of this for a really long time. And that certainly shows. So climate action and the climate action emergency is really critical. And it takes a broad approach. At the University of Michigan, there was an initial plan developed 5 or 6 years ago. And that plan, unfortunately, didn't move forward as quickly as it should have, partly because it didn't have the broad look of how we were going to implement it in a really firm way. And it was only when, as it got, a little bit more dusted off, we took a new approach where we partnered with the operations folks very clearly and took it out of a purely academic realm into a focus where there are management that is done within our VP of operations and finance office, with somebody hired specifically that is thinking about every one of our buildings and also working across the system to be considering, how exactly we're going to build this building to these specifications, how exactly we're going to get solar up, how we're going to think about that parking lot over there to make sure that it has panels on it the right way. So you have to have a good plan, and I know you have a good plan here, but how you implement that plan is really, really important. And that's where it gets really difficult. We have to think broadly. We have to think across, scope 1 and scope 2 and scope 3. We've done some thinking lately and around the University of Michigan about how we think on the operational side, also how we're going to support people moving from point A to point B and how that's part of our sustainability goals. How will we decrease emissions in our commuting? On the research side, which has been a separate focus specifically, and I oversee 3 of our main institutes that are focused on sustainability now. There are many at the university, and they are getting knitted together in a variety of different ways. On the research side, our responsibility is to help generate the new knowledge that will lead forward on this topic. But with that, how we do that as a living lab for our students. And as those projects and, as we're investing in creating the knowledge for what the next hydrogen fuel source will be, or as we're working, with a major airline on how the aviation fuel that's developed will actually be more sustainable, because, we can do a lot of things individually, but we obviously addressing those larger business goals are also really important. How do we get the students involved in taking the work that they're doing and implementing them as in a living lab way, so that they can be researching and studying them on the campus as we're moving forward in trying to figure out how we get our campuses quickly to sustainability.
We have the Vice President for Finance and Facilities leading a lot of that work on our campus. So I agree with you totally that you need someone who can operationalize that. Thank you so much. We are at the end of our quick hour of questions. I hope that you got a sense of us a little bit more, as well as we getting a sense of you. We are very grateful that you're starting at Morris. We would like to say that we think you're starting at the best campus. We believe that. We genuinely do.
It's a great introduction to the system. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all.